This educational program is made possible by the support of our generous Patreon patrons. And as always, check out the description below for time codes and for all resources discussed in this episode. And now, let's start the show. Welcome one and all to another episode of Engage, where learning through play is the name of the game. I sincerely hope that you and yours are healthy and safe. In our last episode, we explored why Among Us should be played in schools. Not only does playing Among Us have enormous potential for bolstering critical thinking skills, but we also discussed how playing Among Us could serve as a launchpad toward analyzing complex characters in a literature class and for digging into persuasive communication strategies. We also explored how Among Us could be leveraged to underscore the importance of media literacy skill development, particularly in terms of sparking conversations about all the strategies that we all should be using to assess the validity and reliability of all of the information that we're all bombarded with on a daily basis. However, given the reality that not every classroom has access to the reliable Wi-Fi that's needed to play Among Us, let alone having enough devices to go around for the teacher and for all the students in a classroom, we're here today to acknowledge those serious challenges in equity and access to technology in schools, and to provide you with a few suggestions for some other capable alternatives that yield similar educational results. So, what other options do we have available to us? Let's stick with video games for a moment. I invite you to take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. And try to imagine a better world where the pandemic is finally over. Everybody has been vaccinated. We all kept wearing masks responsibly for as long as we needed to stop the spread of the virus. And we're all able to share spaces comfortably again without the fear of getting sick or getting others sick. I know that's really hard to imagine right now, but please just dream with me for just a moment. If you're going back to a school environment with a limited amount of devices to go around and shaky Wi-Fi at best, you obviously probably won't be able to facilitate a lot of the ideas we discussed in the last episode of Engage with gathering small groups of students together to play Among Us simultaneously, if at all. But you could find that same kind of brooding sci-fi horror social deduction tension in Who Lurks: Alien Horizon. What's sort of funny about highlighting Who Lurks as an alternative to Among Us is that fans of Among Us have probably heard the story about how that indie darling was originally released back in 2018, yet Among Us didn't catch fire until 2 years later. But Who Lurks, which is pretty close to being the same game, originally debuted back in March of 2016. Wait, what? If they're basically the same game, then why did Among Us catch fire instead? First off, because Who Lurks is a strictly local multiplayer experience, that means that its outreach is naturally more limited compared to a game that can be played with almost anyone from almost anywhere online. But Who Lurks is no less of a game, and as an added bonus for classrooms that have access to only a limited amount of devices, you only need one device to play with 3 to 6 players. Developed by Hybrid Humans, Who Lurks leans slightly harder into the sci-fi horror theme with its ominous background music and with having each player take on the role of a specific crewmate, such as the ship's doctor or chef. This is more for thematic purposes, not so much for roleplay within the game itself, but as players will be taking their turns one at a time, I'd highly recommend encouraging students to act out the roles that the game will randomly assign to them to add another layer to the experience. When players pass around the shared device at the beginning of the game, each player will have their thumbprint scanned, and one player will learn that he or she is the alien that has snuck on board. Now, unlike the imposter in Among Us, the alien in Who Lurks goes all in on sabotage. Once all of the character roles have been assigned, the crew will be briefed on a mission, and players will take turns passing the device around to complete mini-game tasks associated with that mission, but each player must do so in secret. Thematically speaking, this is because, unlike you would be when you're playing this game, the characters you are playing as are not actually in the same room at the same time together. And gameplay-wise, this is because after the second round, the alien is going to start messing with everybody with their unique mind control ability. On their turn, the alien can choose to manipulate one other crewmate and make the next task they will be assigned to complete much harder than it would ordinarily be. These games are already tricky to complete, and they scale up in difficulty throughout the course of the game, so sniffing out the saboteur is going to be a lot harder than you would think. Like I said, it's a pretty similar game to Among Us, but thinking back to that suggested compare and contrast exercise from our last episode, if you play a game like Lurks that is capable of partially running itself on autopilot, you can grant students the opportunity still to be able to observe the action from the sidelines, and this may particularly benefit those students who struggle to pick up on nonverbal cues and body language and really think deeply about how those elements can impact one's powers of persuasion. If we take things one step further out of consideration for accessibility, particularly thinking in terms of breaking down language barriers, or for helping students with certain special needs who struggle with nonverbal communication cues, let's pivot now towards tabletop gaming and have a look at Skull, otherwise known as Skull and Roses. Skull has a low barrier to entry as it's incredibly easy to learn, and for the benefit of those kinds of students that I just mentioned, there's little to no verbal communication necessary in order to play this game. Players can talk as much as they want, and that's part of the fun, but it's not a requirement. Although, come to think of it, it might be really interesting after they get the hang of playing this game to ask your students to play Skull without being allowed to talk at all, and then to reflect on that experience. How's that for a conversation starter about accessibility? From the teacher's perspective, you can easily squeeze a game or 3 of Skull into your typical 45-minute class period, and if you choose to invest in multiple copies of the game, it won't break the bank as it usually runs about 15 or 20 bucks a pop. Or, if you're really in a pinch, you can make your own. All you need in order to play this 3 to 6 player game are 4 ordinary coasters like this one, or 4 ordinary playing cards per player, with one of the 4 marked differently from the rest to serve as a player's skull. As long as all the cards or the coasters that you're playing with all look the same from the backside from the point of view of everybody else seated around the table, you're good to go. In the interest of time for this episode, you can find a link to an excellent tutorial on how to play Skull in the description below under resources. Following Lurks and Skull, our next suggestion for an alternative to Among Us that has a low barrier to entry is arguably the granddaddy of all of these social deduction games, Mafia. And the best part about Mafia is, all you need is a rules reference and you're good to go. Incidentally, students might find the history behind how this game was created really fascinating. According to Wired UK, the game of Mafia made its debut back in 1986 in the wake of the Cold War, a period of history that, by the way, typically doesn't get much airtime, so to speak, in schools, as your average US history curriculum will usually call it a day by the time you get to the end of World War II, if not maybe the Vietnam War. Designer Dmitry Davidoff was cramming 2 years of college psychology studies into one while teaching high school students, and he wanted to devise a way to teach those students in an engaging way about, and I quote, the uninformed majority versus the informed minority. Not a subject that escapes any relevance 35 years later, does it? And what's this? A teacher that designed a game to help their students learn something in a way that would stick in their minds? Madness, I tell you. Madness! Eventually, Davidoff decided to emigrate over to the United States, and he brought Mafia over with him. And when Hasbro caught wind of his game, they approached him about marketing it, but Davidoff reportedly was not interested in commercializing his creation. Nevertheless, once it hit stateside, the game of Mafia soon found its way into weaving into all kinds of social gatherings, and in 1997, interactive fiction author Andrew Plotkin discovered the game at a convention run by the National Puzzlers League. Plotkin was immediately hooked, and he soon sought to introduce the game to a much wider audience using this newfangled contraption at the time called the Internet, but he decided the game needed one little tweak. In Plotkin's opinion, the concept of having a mafia family and how a mafia family operates had limited reach across different cultures of the world. Remember we talked before about accessibility and language barriers? He thought about what kind of theme would fit this game that translates better and has more of a cross-cultural reach, something that would be more deeply entrenched in a mythology that has spanned multiple different cultures over the course of human history. And that is when Mafia transformed into Werewolf. Nowadays, there are all kinds of different variants of both Mafia and Werewolf. If you'd like to find out how it all began, you could check out a link to the original rules written by David F. himself in the description below. Or maybe you fancy picking up a copy of the original Are You a Werewolf reskin. Or maybe the latest craze of One Night Werewolf is what intrigues you, as that condenses the entire experience into just one single round of guided play. Certain variants spice things up a little by giving players different roles to play that were not in the original rules, and I'll leave it up to you to investigate how those changes impact the core game. For our next suggestion, we're going to stick with mythological horror for a moment and venture into T for Teen territory with a look at Dead of Winter. As much as I personally hate zombies as they freak the hell out of me, I love introducing people to this game by Isaac Vega and John Gilmore because it puts one diabolically clever twist on the trader mechanic that neither Among Us nor Who Lurks have to offer, and that is when you play this game, you might not even have a trader at all. You see, in Dead of Winter, you take on the role of two survivors fighting to survive a zombie apocalypse that's still in progress, and everybody is hunkered down in a colony together, fighting to survive crisis after crisis, like making sure you have enough food to eat, or that you have enough medicine to withstand illnesses that everybody might catch in the bitter cold. But each player also has their own secret objective to complete, and there are going to be times where your secret objective conflicts with whatever crisis everyone is facing at the moment, not to mention the collective goal you're all trying to accomplish as a team. On top of all that, you might have somebody in the colony who's plotting to betray everyone and run off and fend for themselves, or you might not. You won't find out until the very end of the game when everybody reveals their secret player objectives. I'm telling you guys, if you love playing Among Us but you've never played Dead of Winter before, you don't know the meaning of sus. You have no idea. But hold up a minute, Jeremy. I can already hear you typing in the comments. And yes, I can hear the comments. Are you kidding me? I don't have time to set up a game like this in any of my classes. I don't even have a table big enough in my classroom to fit all this. What are you, crazy? Trust me, I understand. I totally get that. That's why we took a look at Who Lurks and Skull and Mafia and Werewolf before taking a look at a game like this. However, if there's any way that you could possibly facilitate a game like this, even if it's like in a small student group activity while the rest of the class is engaged in something else, it is well worth facilitating that experience. It's one thing to dig into a really impactful novel or a TV show or a film, or if you're fortunate enough, go out and take a field trip to a local theater to take in a play, and then take the time to dissect and analyze and reflect upon that story where complex characters are forced to grapple with do-or-die ethical dilemmas, or wrestle with themselves about whether they can place trust in others. But it's on another level entirely to be able to explore the complexities of what does it mean to be human within a carefully moderated gaming space. Because games offer something that other forms of media don't. Games are dynamic. They require you to be directly engaged and play an active role in the experience. Don't get me wrong, books and TV shows and films and plays in the theater, they're all exceedingly valuable, but only games require you to have that active role in telling the story. And if we truly value learning by doing, then we should value learning through play. Now, obviously, an experience like Dead of Winter is not appropriate for everyone in every setting, given its apocalyptic theme and its strong penchant for creating such intense dramatic tension amongst players. And that's why I said it'd be more for your T for Teen, hopefully more mature middle school and high school age group. But I do have one more suggestion for you today. And this suggestion is technically more of a party game that's rated for ages 8 and up, and while I'm sure that any second grader out there probably could grasp the rules on how to play pretty easily, you might decide that given this game's theme, that it's also more appropriate for a teen for teen audience. But the good news is, it doesn't have to be that way, and we'll talk about that later, so hold that thought. Unlike any other social deduction game that we've discussed thus far, Two Rooms and a Boom has the capacity to be played with up to 30 players, so chances are greater that you'll be able to play with your whole class at the same time, and it's a game that will get everyone up and on their feet. Much like Among Us and Who Lurks, there's a low barrier to entry to learn how to play this game, and each player will be taking on a secret role. But much like in Dead of Winter, we're not dealing with a simple black and white, good versus evil, crewmates versus alien imposter scenario here. The following is the general gist of how Two Rooms and a Boom is played for the sake of context, but for more granular details, you can find a free print and play version of the rules and the secret individual character roles on the Tuesday Night Games website, which I've linked to in the description below. At the beginning of the game, after all the secret roles have been assigned, players are then randomly separated out into one room or the other. And I say room here with heavy air quotes because as long as you have enough space to put players in room 1 over here far enough apart from room 2 so that they can't just eavesdrop into each other's conversations super easily, you're good to go. You don't literally need 2 completely separate rooms in order to play this game, but if you can swing it, it does help. Once the roles have been assigned, one player on the blue team will find out that they are the president, and one player on the red team will find out that they are the bomber. Now the goal of the game collectively for the blue team is to figure out who the president is and who the bomber is and keep them separated for the duration of the game in order to save the president's life. And the red team, well, they collectively win if the blue team fails to protect the president. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. What did you say the blue team's goal was again?
You gotta keep them separated.
And what was the red team's goal again?
Come together right now.
Now here's the kicker. Before the clock starts on the very first round of play, and there are give or take 3 to 5 rounds depending on how many people you have playing, each group, each room elects its own leader, and only that leader has the ability to send players from one room to the next at the end of a round when the clock runs out. And that elected leader can be deposed at any time if the players in a room decide that a change in leadership is needed. Now what makes Two Rooms and a Boom interesting from an educator's perspective is you have a ton of wiggle room, a ton of freedom in how you can approach playing this game. The only strict rules in place that you have to follow are these, and you might end up with 1 or 2 character roles that make an exception or two to these rules, but that's it. This is what you have to work with. Remember when I said earlier that you might decide that this game skews a bit more T for teens territory? Well, that's only if you take the premise of this game at face value, but it doesn't have to be that way. Let's not beat around the bush here. Thematically, this game is all about protecting a world leader from an assassination attempt. I suppose if you teach a world history class, you could use this game to explore the hypothetical scenario of what could have happened if Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not assassinated. Would World War I still have happened? Plus, you can have your students explore and research why is that person so significant in that part of history anyway? Why was the assassination of just one guy enough to trigger a whole global conflict? My point here is that's only one hyper-specific context for leveraging this game as is. But in your classroom, Two Rooms and a Boom doesn't have to be about that. Because this game rests on a rock-solid foundation, all you have to do as an educator is tweak the character goals just a little bit to fit another context, while keeping the collective team goals the same, bearing in mind that the blue team wants to keep character X away from character Y, and the red team wants to bring character X and character Y together. Maybe you're exploring biology and all these different character roles now represent different systems of the human body, like the immune system. Maybe now the president character is a healthy cell and the bomber character is a virus that's lurking through the bloodstream searching for a new host. Or, knowing that allergy season is almost upon us at the time of filming this episode, maybe the bomber character is a harmless social butterfly of an allergen like pollen, and your president character is your well-meaning but totally misguided antibody. And if you leave those two in a room alone together by the end of the game, then everybody's going to be coughing and sneezing their brains out. And that's just one example of how an educator could reskin this game for a science class. I'm sure there's a million ways to do it. And if you have ideas, if you teach science, share your ideas in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. So all in all, there are tons of social deduction games out there beyond Among Us alone that are practically begging to be leveraged as part of your classes in all kinds of different ways. How would you leverage social deduction games in school? Leave your thoughts and ideas in the comments below. Until then, I've been Jeremy, and this has been Engage, where learning through play is the name of the game. Thanks for watching.